Good morning, everyone. I was here yesterday more in body than in spirit as I was sort of thinking about my own presentation and paying attention to what was happening. But perhaps there were also some trends that you noticed yesterday or some key phrases. Oh, keynote, bless you. Oh, technology's hard. Oh, I have to find it again. I don't want a new document. Come on, Keynote. Oh. Dun, 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 dun. We're not using the 16:3, we're using the 4x. Oh. Empathy. Empathy's hard. Empathy's harder than technology. Empathy for machines, yeah. Where have I put it, though? Modified. There you go. I bet that this is going to crash the whole way through. It's something about the 4x3, so I may need to switch to my 16:9. Let's see if I try this again. Yesterday, as we wait to see if it crashes. So there were a couple of themes that we went through, and they kind of had to do with empathy, although they didn't use the keyword empathy. And one of the things that Charity was talking about this morning definitely did have that empathy word in there. So a few of the things that I noticed were the concept of pair programming, sitting beside someone as opposed to across from someone, using in distributed teams in Bridget's talk. One of the comments was being explicit in your communications about the feelings that are attached to the specific words. And then ultimately, in I think it was Keith's presentation, saying trust is earned, not bought or given. Those are all related to what I'm going to talk about today. So some of the specific outcomes that I want you to come away with are the ability to improve your team cohesion, to be able to engineer successful human interaction outcomes, to improve capacity for diverse thinking, and also to foster creative problem solving. But I do have a bit of a favor to ask of you first. I know the Wi-Fi is a bit sketchy. Today's actually my mom's birthday. So if everyone could send her an email, or at least some of you, and wish her a happy birthday, I would be very appreciative. It's so I've been in the UK for over a year now. She's still in Canada. I'm missing her birthday. I'm a bad daughter, I get it. But if you could just send her a little note, I'd be really, really appreciative. So, wave to Mom. Yay, thanks, Mom. Happy birthday. So she's Marianne at gingerpress.com, and that email will be on the final slide as well. So now that we've done that, this talk is actually not really titled Emphatically, Empathetic, or Cultivating Empathy. It's really a primer on how I taught myself to be more empathetic. And a bit of a warning, it is kind of a touchy-feely woo-woo talk. It's not technical in nature, except for the part where it does get very technical about skill sets, of which empathy is one. And one of the things that I have learned over the years is that empathy is a skill. It's a skill that can be practiced, and it's a skill that can be improved upon. And fortunately, Temple Grandin, who is a researcher, she herself has autism, has recognized that this is a skill that normal people don't necessarily exhibit. A few years ago, I took a leadership training program, and one of the things, it's like it's called 40i. It's like Myers-Briggs or like True Colors. You've probably heard of those ones. And you go through a skills assessment, a series of binary questions where you say, would you do this or do that in any given scenario? And, well, it turns out empathy is not really my favorite thing to do. In case you haven't noticed this particular graph, I scored 0 on empathy in the workplace. And that was because for me, work was something that you showed up, you did the business of work, and when the business of work was done, you left work, and that's when you went and had fun and actually engaged with people who you wanted to hang out with. But it wasn't things that I was really comfortable in sort of crossing lines and crossing boundaries. I wanted work to be professional, and I wanted fun to be fun. And I wanted to not try and overstep my reach. The question was things like, are you able to perceive this problem from the other person's perspective? And I knew full well that I was not able to pretend to be someone else just because I'd have a couple of conversations with them in a hallway about a problem. So I was very careful in how I responded in those questions to never think that I had the audacity to understand what someone else was thinking or feeling about a particular problem. And as a result, I scored my 0 on empathy. So at that point in time, I had to decide, was this a skill that I wanted to learn and practice and start to engage in a healthy way? Or was this something where I was perfectly happy being stronger in the other areas, the more analytical areas of understanding instead of the compassion side of understanding? So we'll start with a couple of definitions here. The first one is empathy itself. The ability to understand and share the feelings of another. And again, feelings at work, no thanks. So this is going to be a little bit scary, but I'm going to walk you through some of the very practical ways you can do this in a healthy and respectful and work-appropriate way. Empathy is not sympathy, which is keeping someone else at a distance and recognizing someone else's misfortune. So the difference between, oh, you've got a bug, that's too bad, versus, oh, you've got a bug, let me help you fix that problem so that it doesn't reoccur again. We're going to go through 3 levels today in the practicing empathy. The level 1, so for those of you who are gamers, I'm not, but apparently you level up. So level 1, we're going to care just enough about a person's life. Level 2, this is where it gets a little bit technical. I'm going to show you some thinking strategies you can use to structure interactions. Level 3, you're going to engage with the world from another person's perspective. And this is where we'll talk a little bit about empathy practitioners and those who feel that empathy is a core part of their job. For those of you who resonate with the term DevOps, you'll perhaps see a bit more in this section that relates to you. So let's start with level 1, caring just enough, beginner level. Everyone should be able to do this. This is when your HR department refers to you as a resource and you don't want to be a resource anymore. This is how you step out of that mindset and convert people from resources into human beings. So this is, for me, like level 1 was actually a difficult challenge to overcome because it required me to remove some of the compartmentalization from where I was, who I was at work to who I was at play. And they are not always the same person, I will say. It requires you to be a little bit vulnerable as well. So there are some risks and rewards associated with this. The reward is that you can improve team cohesion and start to develop that sense of trust or some bond between your coworkers that allow in difficult situations for things to not turn into a blame game. It does require a little bit of time, but that's really your only risk, so why not give it a try? So this is how we do it. We collect stories. People love to talk about themselves generally, but they need to be given prompts. They need to be given topics or safe things to discuss with you. The weather turns out very Canadian, also very English thing to talk about, very safe. You can dive a little bit deeper than the weather though, and just start asking questions. Now, this is the hard part. You need to be quiet and listen to the answers. You need to not jump in with your own version of the experience. You need to simply receive the information. If you don't know what STFU is, I encourage you to Google it, but I'm not going to actually say it out loud. So that's why this one is really challenging. You need to receive the information, and then when the story is done, at that point you can respond. And it is most appropriate to respond in a way that encourages more information gathering, or to simply say, that sounds really exciting, or that sounded like it really sucked. But maybe not also give your example story back again. Now later, maybe a day later, maybe a week later, maybe a month later, you would say to that person, so you were telling me about story X, and this is why the weather doesn't really work, because, a month ago we were talking about how sunny it was. Wow, wasn't that fantastic? Not really a great way to develop bonds with someone. So now we're going to follow up on the story and ask them if there's been any development in that particular series of of events in their life for that particular situation. So you have to pick some long-running topics to discuss with people. So that's level 1. I hope that's pretty straightforward and people are feeling comfortable with level 1. We'll now move on to level 2. And this is where we get a little bit more into the weeds of, like, I really like to classify things. Spreadsheets are kind of a hobby for me. So I recognize that this may be a little bit over the top for some folks, but ultimately, what I want you to get out of this is that there are ways to engage in sort of workplace scenarios, and you can wrap some structure around them. One of the biggest mistakes that we make is to assume that our way of thinking is the correct and only way of thinking. And this framework will show you that there's actually a number of different thinking strategies which people can be fantastic at and which you can leverage. So the rewards and risks here are that we can engineer successful outcomes, we can improve capacity for diverse thinking, but at the risk level, you can come across as a little bit manipulative. So some of the things, for those of you who have read about, I'm cringing just suggesting that these things are even related. But if you've heard about NLP or pickup artists or those kinds of things, like this is the really nasty level of what can happen if you use this strategy. What we're looking to do, though, is we're looking to uncover motivators and unpack why a person behaves the way that they do, and then figure out, can we structure situations in a way that allow for that person to have the best possible outcome? Can we create an environment where small wins can happen for that person? So here we've got our thinking strategies, and we can see empathy in the middle. So you've seen those yellow or slow down strategies before. Over on the left-hand side, I'll go through each of these in more detail, but on the left-hand side, we've got creativity, opening up, expanding ideas, and then we've got slow down and think, those understanding strategies, and then finally we have stop and make decision strategies. So in the 4DI version of this, they break it down into the 3 dimensions with 7 mindsets and 18 success strategies. The difference between this system and some of the other ones is that this suggests that these are skills that you can choose to use or not. This is not a life-defining 4-letter acronym that you will be assigned. I also am a true believer in the sense of before and after coffee. I may have had more empathy had I done the quiz after coffee, hard to say. But this is the breakdown that they give. So let's dive into this a little more. The first one we've got is the creative thinking, and this is challenge, envision, brainstorm, reframe, flash of insight, and flow. I can't pronounce his name. Can someone say Mahali's last name? The flow guy? Something like that, yes. So that's what that's in reference to, is that idea of you're in the zone, essentially. So the creative language types are always interested in the new ideas and opening things up. So common phrases that you will hear from a creative thinker: can we try? I know we're done, but what about? Oh my God, I just had this great idea. What do you think? And is this the best we can do? So someone who refuses to make a decision and is constantly coming up with new ideas, and they don't want to sort, they don't want to filter, they are amazing folks to have around when you are in difficult situations and need to think of new ideas quickly. This is a fantastic skill set to have on your team, and perhaps one that is underrepresented in technical fields right now, at least according to the profile information that has been collected from the 4DI system. So the next one that we've got is the understanding thinking. Again, this is where empathy lies. And half of this is compassion, and half of it is analytical information or analytical gathering. So scan, structure, clarify. That's dealing, well, even clarify. When you tell me something and then I repeat it back to you, basically using the same words, and it gets really tedious because you don't want me to repeat what you've just said, that's because I'm big in clarify. I like to make sure that I've internalized the right information and then we'll repeat it back. Once you know that about me, I get way less irritating. I get irritating in other ways, but way less irritating on that one. And then tune in, empathize, and express. Those are all to do with more human characteristics instead of information characteristics or data characteristics. Common phrasing on this one. So what you're saying is, just to clarify, I think this is related to, so I made this spreadsheet. I know there's some of you who are out there. I'm also a project manager, so it's kind of a thing we have, right? And then also, that must feel horrible. So on the empathy part of things, these others aren't related to just stating that must feel horrible. So that's our understanding thinking. And the next one we've got here is the decision thinking. And these are the stop people. These are also people that you want in times of crisis because they're not going to spend all of their time thinking about how to solve a problem. They're going to be able to act. They're going to be able to spot what's happening and make a decision. It might not be 100% right, but they'll pivot and they'll make the next decision and they'll make the next decision. Don't ask me where I want to go for dinner. I am horrible on the decision making when it doesn't really matter. So here we've got getting to the crux of the problem, validating what the solution is, using data, doing those measurements to make sure the right decision is being made, working from experience, making conclusions, using the gut instinct, and also value-driven thinking. Categorization isn't hugely important on this one, but again, there's that idea of the data plus the human factors. So some of the language in here, I'm ready to move on. Pair a green or creative thinker and a red thinker, you're going to get a lot of clashes there because the creative thinker wants to open up, the decision thinker wants to close down the conversation. I don't know why I think this, but someone relying on their gut instincts. Last time we tried this, their experience, the real problem is getting to the crux, and my gut tells me. So there's different language patterns that you can pick up for each of these different thinking strategies. And what you want to be able to do is to take the team that you've got and think about what are the behaviors that they've sort of demonstrated in the past, and how can I construct an engaging scenario so that each of those people feels that they've been listened to and they've been accommodated for. One of the easiest way to do this is in a meeting. Say, we're going to brainstorm this problem for 10 minutes. Then we're going to spend 5 minutes sorting through the solutions, and then we're going to spend 3 minutes making a decision. The decision maker knows it's going to suck for, what was my math on this one, 18 minutes? And then it's going to be okay for the last 3. The creative thinker knows they pretty much own the meeting because they get to brainstorm for most of the meeting. And then they need to let the decision making happen. So actually putting in your agenda, what do you expect the outcome to be? What style of thinking do you need for each of those decision or each of those agenda points? Way more useful than, we will be discussing topic X as presented by person Y. We will be discussing, what does discussing mean? What do you need from me? And how can I provide my best possible self or the skills that I'm good at any one of those points in time? I had a funny version of this where it was help me, help you, and then I had help you, help me, and it was a Jerry Maguire reference, but I took it out. All right, so this is my full profile from a couple of years ago before I started thinking actively about empathy. So I think these are more useful when they're shared as well, because now you can try and game me, which is always fun, because you can try and construct scenarios where I'm going to be able to provide the exactly expected response. But you can also start to use my skills when they're required. So if you want someone, I know I'm going to step out of the recording here for a minute, but if you want someone to help you brainstorm on a whiteboard, that's not going to be me. If you want someone to help you reframe a problem, if you give me a scenario at work and tell me how something is really not going well right now, I can probably help you think about it from a different perspective. If you want someone to be the devil's advocate, I am totally here to help you challenge things. So this breakdown, it's also to me, obviously the result of a binary set of questions. There's some things that I'm hugely likely to select and other things that I just won't touch with a 10-foot pole. Given the way the question was phrased in a workplace environment before having had coffee 3 years ago. So I think they're neat and I think they're useful. So I do recommend that, like, I use this one, use a different one, I don't really care. But see if you can find a system to use with your team to be able to make communication more explicit and to be able to recognize the strengths that different team members have. What the charity gave the example of it was a front desk person who became an ops something something. What was that story? Is she in the room still? Receptionist. Yeah. So taking a look at what someone's future potential is. If someone's really great at brainstorming and you need a brainstormer, give them the problem space and have them run wild with it with zero, sort of don't take them into the knees. Just let them run with the problem. And then take all those ideas and actually filter through them with the folks who would be able to do the technical implementation. You can get amazing, amazing ways of thinking about problems by simply thinking about what a person or a person's preferences are for dealing with information or with people instead of their background skills. So now we go into level 3. And this is where things got a little bit more tricky and where I struggle on this one. And the reason why I struggle on this one is that for me, if I truly get inside someone else's shoes, if I truly experience myself from someone else's perspective, this can cause incredible amounts of self-doubt. So this is where if you are going to engage at the imagination level or the empathy practitioner level, you need to have a support team around you, and whether that's your coworkers or your friends and families, you need to have someone who can actually support you in experiencing a situation from a different perspective. It can be quite overwhelming if you don't have that support network in place. But it does allow for very, very creative problem solving in ways that I now have seen myself engage in problems in ways that I, in the workplace, absolutely would not have done 10 or 20 years ago. So in this place, what we're going to do, or in this sort of third level, is we're going to seek to understand, and as I said, complain about yourself from another person's perspective, or complain about the situation or whatever it happens to be from another perspective. And what we want to do is we want to have the experience of being that person, not through your own filter, but through their filter. So I've got two fairly short stories on this one. The first one is my account manager last fall broke her wrist. And I knew she was using dictation software, and it was mostly cute most of the time. We are a distributed company. Mostly cute most of the time. You could just read it phonetically, and it made sense. But it wasn't until I watched her using the dictation software and saw how much frustration and just swearing to the point of tears that she couldn't make it say the words or she couldn't make it type the words that she wanted it to type, that I came to realize I could just structure my emails in a slightly different way and have it be a yes-no response, not 3 questions, each of which had a different, say it this way, it has a yes answer. Say it that way, it has a no answer. Say it this way, it has a yes answer. Don't make her type out the answer to that. Very clear emails that had only one possible answer. Super easy on my part. I was already typing the emails, but it ended up in a much better outcome. And without empathy, so that's a skill I had to practice or engage in, that would not have been possible as an outcome because I would have continued to write my style of emails. The second one, we were working with a client who was amazing. He missed the how to be a jerk client meeting where they all get trained on the same tactics. He totally missed that meeting, and he was amazing. He came to stand up, he was engaged, he came to planning meetings, he was totally on board, he was lovely to brainstorm with. But every 2 to 4 weeks, he'd get really grumpy. And we didn't really understand why this was. So I actually asked him one day, I was like, hey, is everything cool with us? Because you're not as happy as you were a couple of days ago. It's like, oh, we're doing really great work, but I have to write this report, and I don't really, we haven't really done anything because it's all scaffolding, and I don't know what to say. It's like, oh, well, why don't I just take the tickets and rewrite them in a way, because again, project manager, rewrite them in a way that you can just plop them into your reports. Oh, you could do that for me? Yeah? I'm already doing it internally. I could just share that with you. That would be amazing. Suddenly, he wasn't grumpy every 2 to 4 weeks. So taking the time to ask if there's anything you can help with, kind of a basic skill, but also something that made everyone's life easier by simply thinking about why the other person or why the customer or why whoever it might be, why are they experiencing frustration and what can I do to help alleviate that frustration? Thinking is a deliberate process. We put our, Bridget yesterday had the great quote from someone that is the software is made of feelings. When we build our software, when we build our teams, when we interact with other people, that is a deliberate thought that we're making. At least it should be a deliberate thought. And having the ability to practice that thought or practice a new way of thinking is going to take a bit of effort on your part. I ultimately think that it's worth it. Maybe not all of you will consider yourselves to be empathy practitioners, so definitely as an empathy practitioner, anthropologists, user researchers, maybe into project managers, maybe, there's a lot of people who need empathy, but I've also met some user researchers who have zero empathy skills when they come to their work each day. So it's something that you'll need to decide at what level you want to engage in. Quick summary, level 1, care just enough. Have those conversations with your coworkers and you can, or with your customers, have great support. You can improve team cohesion. You can improve the experience that your customers have with your service. Level 2, structure your interactions. Recognize that there's different ways of thinking and make the situation into something that allows each person to shine with their preferred way of thinking. You can engineer successful outcomes and improve the capacity for diverse thinking within your team when you engage with a systematic approach to thinking. Excuse me. And then level 3 is to think from another person's perspective. And at this point, we can foster creative problem solving and really come up with unique and novel ways of doing things. I recognize the examples I gave you weren't exactly unique or novel, but they are, they're an introduction into how we can think about building systems that are respectful of the people who need to use those systems. I think ultimately, and this is a quote from Maya Angelou, but I think ultimately we do have empathy, and some of us may not have the courage to display it. So one last time, now that I've given you this whole empathy talk, if you do have questions, I'm happy to answer them one-on-one, because certainly not everyone wants to out their experiences as being a zero empathy person, but I got you, man, I got you. And it is my mom's birthday today, so if you are up for these kinds of fun shenanigans, if you would drop her an email, marianne@gingerpress.com. Thank you very much.
Time for a few questions.
Okay, great. Yes.
Do you do anything in the interviewing process to test for empathy?
So big caveat, I have not been involved as a hiring manager in the interviewing process. I have been involved as a coworker, and it is not something that I would want to consciously test for just because of my own background of not necessarily being totally comfortable immediately using empathy. There have been a couple of scenarios where I have been interviewed, and the way that the questions were phrased of me suggested that I was going to be required to immediately give trust to all of my coworkers, and I felt that the company had not yet earned my trust, and I failed the interview because I did not demonstrate my little personal retro was that I hadn't demonstrated empathy, but I didn't trust them enough to give them my empathetic self. So can you test for it? Sure, you can run them through a system and then decide what their profile is, but you have to be careful on it for sure. Yeah. Yep.
Do you ever find yourself
Probably yes.
gaining empathy?
Yes, yes.
So the perception of empathy rather than, saying the right things and giving the perception of empathy without actually emotionally engaging.
Yes, and this is where the nasty side in terms of manipulative and pickup artist or NLP, there are sales techniques that have to do with physically matching, like So, if you're doing this, then I'll do this, and sort of drawing people into the behaviors that you want. Can it be gamed? Absolutely. Are you a bit of a jerk if you game it? Absolutely. Is there a point where you're not totally comfortable with it and you want to get better, where you do the fake it till you make it? Absolutely. So you need to decide if you're being genuine around it, and you also need to decide if those who are engaging in it are doing it with a genuine compassion and genuine wanting to learn, or if you're just playing feelings 101 again with someone. So yeah, it can go either way. Look at me not answering any of your questions, but just ranting. Yes.
It's one thing to recognize empathy within yourself.
Yep.
How would you encourage and promote empathy in others in your team?
Great question. Can you give me more context for this question?
So, for example, I'm in an engineering team. We're creating software and systems for other users, but sometimes those solutions aren't necessarily that useful because people delivering that change don't understand what our users are actually trying to get from the system.
Okay, so in this case, if it's about being able to, I'll see if I can paraphrase it. It's about, in this case, the outside user and not knowing for sure if what we're building is meeting their needs. And they may be asking for features that aren't really what they need. They just say they need it, although you didn't say that, I'm adding that on. So in that case, I would say that having someone on the team whose job it is to go and do user research, whether they're through surveys, through interviews, through more communication metrics, like the split testing things, are they actually using these features? Those kinds of things will be useful to you. And then give me the short version of your question again that you had at the very beginning.
How can I make Bob care about Dave on a different team in our company?
How can you make Bob care about Dave on a different team in your company? That's a fantastic, so yes, I think the best way to do it is to have them to sit down together. And that's really tricky. So, yeah. If you're a distributed company, doing face-to-face kickoffs can be great. If you are, and remember how I said the meeting agenda in terms of constructing small wins for people, is there, and like this is like nasty and horrible and manipulative, but can you construct a scenario? Can you use your imagination skills to think about what common enemy do Bob and Dave have, and how can I, it's like I'm a bit of a jerk, right? How can I, also project manager, how can I construct a scenario in which Bob and Dave need to work on the common enemy? And the common enemy might be me. So I do have situations that I perhaps inadvertently, put the wrong information into a ticket in a way that I know, like you all know my secrets now, in a way that I know that Bob and Dave will respond in the same way, so that now they have something in common. And they'll build on that. And I'm the common enemy, but it works sometimes. Great question, thank you. Yes?
I know this isn't a tools talk, but
Since
you wrote a book about Git, which can sometimes lead to screaming and tears, vomit.
Yes.
Can you address at all how when using a tool that, as a distributed version control system, sometimes leads people to have conflict, how empathy applies in the context of Git for Teams?
So I wrote a book, yay, books, called Git for Teams, and the first section of the entire book doesn't talk at all about the actual tooling of Git. It says, sit down with your team and talk about how you want to use the tool. Document how you want the process to work, draw diagrams, and then from those diagrams, start writing down the commands of how you're going to use it. Because there's often many ways to use a particular tool, and there's generally, other than the zealots in your team, there's generally not a single agreed upon way of using that tool, which actually is universally true. So sitting down with your team and hashing it out and drawing the pictures can result in a better experience of the tool. One of my first talks on Git was Git makes me angry inside, and the result of that talk was me saying, wow, a lot of people showed up to this talk, and perhaps I need to figure out a better way of helping people to learn Git specifically, and that's what the book came out of. So if there's a tool at work that you're finding the same sort of like, all this really does is induces rage, but if we know it's the right tool, how can you walk back and actually figure out why that tool is causing rage and what the differences of opinion are, figuring it out outside of the actual tool can make a big, big difference.
So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you.